I am Jessica, 35 years old, and tonight should have been the happiest night of my life. At least, that's what my family thought when they gathered in the living room, clapping, laughing, and showering me with congratulations. My mother's eyes glistened as she announced, "Finally, your engagement is fixed," while my aunts whispered approvingly, and cousins shared smiles that felt more rehearsed than genuine. My hands trembled in my lap, but I pressed them tightly together, forcing a smile that I knew did not reach my eyes. A part of me wanted to scream, to shout at them all that they were celebrating something that felt wrong, rushed, and disturbingly orchestrated. But I swallowed the words. I stayed silent, because silence had become my armor in a house where speaking too much often led to consequences I wasn't prepared to face. The scent of roasted chicken filled the room, mixing with the floral perfume my mother always wore when she wanted things to appear perfect for guests. Yet beneath the fragrance and laughter, an invisible tension coiled itself around my chest. I remember distinctly the moment the call came. The shrill ring of the phone cut through the chorus of claps, piercing the room like a knife slicing through silk. Everyone fell silent, their eyes shifting toward the landline sitting on the corner table. My uncle picked it up at first, his usual cheerful voice answering, "Yes, hello," but the tone on the other end quickly stripped the joy from his expression. His face paled, his eyes darting nervously toward me, and then he extended the receiver with a trembling hand. "Jessica, it's for you." My legs felt like lead as I crossed the room, every step accompanied by the growing certainty that something irreversible was about to happen. The entire family watched, their smiles collapsing into confusion. I pressed the phone to my ear, and a voice, low, urgent, and cracking with horror, delivered the sentence that shattered the illusion of celebration. "That boy's body was just found." The room seemed to tilt as the words echoed inside me. My throat dried, and though I wanted to ask 100 questions, where, how, when all I could hear was the pounding of blood in my ears. The boy they spoke of was the same man my family had just celebrated me being engaged to. A man whose hand I had never willingly held, whose eyes I had avoided every time they lingered too long on me. My body stiffened, my skin prickling as though the very walls of the room had betrayed me. Gasps erupted behind me, my mother's hand clutching her chest, my father muttering, "This can't be true." My cousins whispered frantically, already weaving stories that felt like spiderwebs designed to trap blame. And me. I stood frozen, my hand tightening on the phone, realizing with a sinking clarity that whatever had just been uncovered wasn't a tragic accident. It was the unmasking of a truth my family had tried to bury, because deep inside, I knew. I had sensed it all along. This engagement was not simply a union of families, it was a transaction, a bargaining chip, a deal with shadows that had stalked me for years. And if his body had truly been found, then his secrets, the ones my parents pretended not to know, the ones whispered behind closed doors, would not stay buried for long. My silence had protected me until now, but suddenly, I wasn't sure if silence would be enough. The celebration had turned into a crime scene, and I was at the center of it. The phone slipped from my hand and hit the floor with a sharp crack that seemed to echo endlessly through the stunned silence of the room. For a moment, nobody moved. The entire family was suspended in disbelief, as though reality itself had been yanked away from us. My mother recovered first, rushing toward me with trembling arms, her voice cracking. "Jessica, this must be some mistake. They must be wrong. He was just here last week, smiling, talking about your future together." But her desperation rang hollow, and I could see it in her eyes. She wasn't trying to convince me. She was trying to convince herself. My father, usually a fortress of composure, sat down heavily on the sofa, his hand covering his face as if shielding himself from a truth too bright and damning to confront. My cousins began to murmur, one of them whispering too loudly, "What if this ruins everything? What will people say?" Their words stung, slicing deeper than any knife. Even in the face of death, their greatest fear was the judgment of neighbors and relatives. I stood in the middle of the room, numb, while fragments of memory stabbed at me, his eyes following me across crowded rooms, his laughter that never seemed to reach his eyes, the way his hand had once gripped my wrist too tightly when nobody else was looking. I had known something was wrong with him. I had felt it in the way my stomach turned every time his name was mentioned. In the restless nights when I dreamed of running away to a place where no one could force me into chains disguised as love. And now he was dead. A part of me should have felt relief, but instead, all I felt was dread. Because if his body had been found, someone had put it there, and that someone might be closer than I wanted to imagine. The police arrived before midnight, their flashing lights painting the walls with cold streaks of red and blue. Officers stepped into the house, their faces grim, their voices clipped and professional as they asked questions nobody wanted to answer. When was the last time you saw him alive? Who was the last person to speak to him? Did he seem distressed? My family stumbled over their replies, trying to appear cooperative while carefully avoiding the cracks in their stories. I watched their performance with detached horror, realizing that everyone in that room had known more than they had ever admitted. My mother wrung her hands, claiming she had spoken to him just 2 days ago and that he sounded cheerful. My father muttered about business dealings that he refused to elaborate on. My uncles exchanged nervous glances, their silence louder than words. When an officer turned to me, his eyes sharp and searching, my chest tightened. "Miss Jessica," he said, his tone slow, deliberate, almost gentle. "Did you have any reservations about this engagement?" The question pierced me, and for a moment, I considered telling him everything: the unease, the fear, the hidden bruises no one had cared to notice. But I looked around at my family, their eyes boring into me, warning me, pleading with me to stay quiet. My mother's lips trembled as she shook her head slightly. An unspoken command, "Don't." And just like that, silence wrapped itself around me again. I forced a smile I didn't feel and answered, "No." Everything was fine. The lie tasted like ash in my mouth, but it was the only answer that kept me safe, at least for now. Still, the officer didn't seem convinced. He held my gaze a second too long, as though he could see the storm raging behind my forced calm. Then he nodded and stepped away, turning his questions back to my father. My knees weakened, and I sank into a chair, my mind spinning faster than I could control. 1,000 thoughts collided inside me. Who killed him? Was it a stranger, or was it someone in this very room? Had my family known something and chosen to ignore it? Or were they part of the darkness themselves? And most terrifying of all, what would happen when the truth inevitably surfaced? Because truths like this didn't stay buried. They clawed their way out, dragging everything in their path into ruin. I stared at the door, its frame glowing faintly from the streetlight outside. And for the first time that night, I felt something shift inside me. Fear was still there, yes, but beneath it, something else stirred, a quiet, simmering resolve. If no one else was going to seek the truth, then I would. And if that truth destroyed the fragile façade my family had built, then so be it. Because I could no longer live inside a lie. Even if that lie had been carefully woven to keep me obedient and quiet. The house emptied slowly after the officers left, their questions lingering like smoke that refused to dissipate. Relatives gathered their coats in uneasy silence, no longer whispering congratulations, but instead muttering fragmented prayers, as though clinging to faith could cleanse the stain that had spread through the evening. My mother insisted on tidying the living room, her movements frantic, almost desperate, wiping surfaces that were already clean, fluffing pillows that no one would dare sit on again that night. My father retreated to his study, the door slamming with a finality that reverberated through the walls, leaving us to interpret his silence however we wished. I watched all of it like an outsider peering through glass, as though I wasn't part of this family at all, but merely an unwilling witness trapped inside their theater of secrets. When the last guest finally stepped into the night, I found myself alone in the dim light of the living room, my reflection staring back at me from the darkened window, eyes wide, lips trembling. A woman who had just realized that the life chosen for her was far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. Sleep didn't come that night. I lay in my bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the phone call over and over again. His voice, low, urgent, haunted, still rang in my ears. That boy's body was just found. I tried to imagine what he looked like now, lifeless, abandoned, stripped of the power he once wielded so carelessly. And yet, the thought didn't bring me peace. Instead, it filled me with questions that clawed at the edges of my sanity. Who had found him? Where had they found him? And most importantly, why was the call directed to me and not to my parents, the ones orchestrating every detail of my life? My gut told me it wasn't random. Someone had wanted me to know. Someone had chosen me to carry this knowledge. And that realization both terrified and strengthened me. Because if I was being drawn into this shadowed web, I would either untangle it or be strangled by it. By morning, the news had spread. His death was no longer a secret whispered in the safety of our walls. It was a headline. Prominent businessman's son found dead under mysterious circumstances. The article painted him as charming, ambitious, the pride of his family, conveniently erasing the darker truths I had always sensed beneath his polished exterior. Neighbors came knocking, offering condolences wrapped in curiosity. their eyes darting to me, measuring my reaction, as though expecting tears. But my face remained unreadable. I couldn't bring myself to cry for a man I had feared more than loved, for a fiancé I had never truly chosen. My silence unsettled them, I could see it. But what unsettled me more was the flicker of something else, pity, perhaps, or suspicion. Whichever it was, it made my skin crawl. That afternoon, as I sat alone in the kitchen, the phone rang again. My pulse quickened, my breath caught, and for a moment, I couldn't bring myself to move. When I finally answered, the same voice spoke low, steady, deliberate. "Jessica," it said, "you don't know me, but you need to understand, his death wasn't an accident. You're not safe." My stomach lurched, my grip tightening on the receiver. Before I could demand answers, the line went dead, leaving only a hollow dial tone that mocked my need for clarity. I sank into the chair, the weight of the words pressing down on me. "You're not safe." The phrase replayed in my mind like a broken record, feeding the unease that had been gnawing at me for months. For the first time, I wasn't sure if I feared my dead fiancé more, or the living shadows that had begun circling me now that he was gone. When my parents returned that evening, their faces drawn and pale, they avoided my gaze. My mother busied herself with the stove, clanging pots and pans, though she had no appetite, while my father retreated into his newspaper, the crinkle of pages louder than any words. I wanted to confront them, to demand the truth, but every time I opened my mouth, something in their silence silenced me. It was as if we were all bound by an unspoken agreement. Don't ask, don't tell, pretend. But pretense was no longer enough for me. That anonymous call had cracked the thought wide open, and now I needed to know what had been hidden in the shadows all along. As night fell again, I made a decision. I wouldn't wait for answers to come to me, I would seek them. His death had not freed me. It had ensnared me even deeper into a mystery I could no longer ignore. Somewhere out there, the truth was waiting, and I felt it pulling me like a thread, daring me to follow. And though fear gnawed at me, though every instinct screamed to stay silent, something stronger surged beneath it. A quiet fury, a refusal to remain a victim. For the first time in years, I felt alive, not because I was safe, but because I knew danger was close. And this time, I would face it head on. The following day began with a heaviness that clung to the air, as though the house itself was suffocating beneath the weight of secrets. My mother avoided eye contact, her face drawn and pale as she pushed a plate of untouched breakfast toward me. My father remained buried behind the newspaper, though I could see his hands trembling with every page he turned. The silence between us was deafening, broken only by the ticking of the clock on the wall. I wanted to scream, to shatter the stillness with the questions that burned in my chest. What did you know about him? Why didn't you warn me? What are you hiding now? But the words caught in my throat, strangled by fear of what their answers might reveal. Instead, I forced myself to eat a single bite of toast, the taste like ash on my tongue, before standing abruptly and retreating to my room. My footsteps echoed against the floorboards, each one a reminder that I was alone in my search for the truth. Even while surrounded by family. Once in my room, I locked the door and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the phone that had delivered such devastating news. My fingers hovered above the buttons as I debated calling the number back, desperate to hear the voice that had warned me, desperate for answers. But when I pressed redial, an automated message crackled through. "This number is no longer in service." My heart sank, though a part of me had expected it. Whoever that person was, they had no intention of being found. Still, their words clung to me like a curse. "You're not safe." The longer I sat there, the more I realized that waiting passively would only make me an easier target. I needed to dig into his life, into the parts my family had carefully concealed, and uncover what had led to his death and why it now threatened me. I began with the obvious, digging through the bottom drawer of my desk. I pulled out a small showbox, where I had stored everything related to the engagement: photographs, invitations, scraps of conversations scribbled on napkins. Each item carried a memory I wanted to erase. Yet now I studied them with the eyes of an investigator, rather than a reluctant bride-to-be. One photo in particular caught my attention, taken at a family dinner months ago. His arm draped around me while his other hand clutched a phone. I zoomed in on the screen, grainy and blurred, but still visible enough to make out the string of numbers. It wasn't just a random call he'd been making. It was the same unknown number that had just called me days ago. My blood ran cold. This wasn't coincidence. Determined, I slipped the photograph into my pocket and left the house under the pretense of running errands. The city felt different that day, as though every stranger's eyes lingered too long. Every shadow stretched wider. Every sound carried hidden meaning. I made my way to the library, a place that always felt safe, though even its quiet aisles and the faint smell of old paper couldn't soothe the storm inside me. Sitting at a computer, I began searching his name, diving into articles and reports that stretched back years. Most painted him as the golden child of his family, a man destined for success. But buried deep within forums and comment sections, I found whispers, rumors of debt, of shady dealings, of women who had suddenly disappeared from his circle with no explanation. My hands shook as I scrolled further, the words blurring together into a dark mosaic of a man whose charm had been nothing more than a mask. Then I found it. An article dated 2 years ago, barely noticed by mainstream media, describing an investigation into his involvement with a corrupt real estate scheme. Properties stolen, families evicted, documents forged. My eyes widened as I read, recognizing names my father had spoken with respect. Names my mother had once entertained in our home. This wasn't just about him. My family was tangled in it too. My stomach twisted, bile rising in my throat. If he had been killed, it wasn't out of passion or chance. It was business. And business like that didn't end cleanly. As I left the library, clutching printed copies of the articles in my hand, a chill raced down my spine. I glanced over my shoulder and caught sight of a man leaning against a car across the street. His eyes were fixed on me, sharp, unblinking. When I slowed, he lit a cigarette but didn't look away. My pulse thundered in my ears. I forced myself to keep walking, my steps steady, though inside I was unraveling. By the time I reached the corner, I risked a glance back. He was gone, but the smoke from his cigarette lingered, curling into the air like a warning. That night, I tucked the papers beneath my mattress, my heart pounding as though they were explosives I had smuggled into the house. I knew my parents couldn't see them. Not yet. Not until I was sure of how deep they were in this, and whether they would protect me or sacrifice me. I lay awake, staring into the darkness, listening to every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind against the window, certain that at any moment, someone would come for me. The voice on the phone had been right. I wasn't safe. But what it hadn't told me was the most terrifying truth of all. My greatest danger might not be strangers lurking outside. It might already be living under the same roof. The morning after my unsettling discovery, I woke with the crushing sensation that someone had been in my room during the night. The curtains swayed slightly though the windows were closed, and the faint scent of smoke lingered in the air, the same acrid smell from the stranger's cigarette the day before. My skin prickled as I scanned the room, every shadow suddenly sinister, every corner a potential hiding place. The showbox was still beneath my bed, its lid slightly ajar, and though the papers I had printed remained tucked under the mattress, I couldn't shake the certainty that someone had been searching. My fingers trembled as I pushed the box back into place, vowing silently that I could no longer leave my secrets unguarded. The thought gnawed at me. If the stranger at the library had followed me home, he knew what I had uncovered. And if he knew, then my family might know soon enough too. Downstairs, the house carried an eerie calm, too deliberate to be natural. My mother moved mechanically between the stove and the sink, her apron spotless despite her restless hands wiping it over and over. My father sat at the dining table, his coffee untouched, his gaze fixed on the newspaper, though I could tell he hadn't turned a page in nearly 20 minutes. "You look tired," my mother remarked, her tone clipped, her eyes never meeting mine. I forced a smile, replying, "I couldn't sleep." The understatement tasted bitter on my tongue. My father's jaw tightened, and for a brief moment, I thought he might say something that would tear through the silence and expose the tension suffocating us. But instead, he simply muttered, "You should rest. There will be more questions today." His words chilled me. More questions from the police, or from others less official, more dangerous. By mid-afternoon, my unease was validated. Two men in dark suits appeared at our doorstep, their faces expressionless, their voices calm yet commanding as they requested to speak with my parents privately. They introduced themselves as investigators, though they displayed no badges, no identification, nothing that could prove their authority. My mother hurried to usher them inside, her hands shaking only slightly as she poured them tea, while my father retreated with them into the study. I lingered near the hallway, pressing my ear against the wall, straining to catch fragments of conversation. Words like debt, partnership, and missing documents filtered through the door, each one a dagger carving deeper into the truth I had already begun to suspect. My father's voice rose once, sharp and defensive. "She doesn't know anything. Leave her out of this." My heart slammed against my ribs. Who was he protecting me from, these men, or the truth itself? When the men finally left, their eyes lingered on me in a way that made my stomach churn, as though I were not a daughter, but a liability. My mother forced a smile and said, "They were just friends offering condolences," but her voice quavered, and I could see the lie trembling on her lips. I nodded anyway, unwilling to push her further, but inside me, a storm brewed. If my family had entangled themselves in his schemes, then his death wasn't just a tragedy, it was a loose end someone wanted to tie up. And I was that loose end. That evening, unable to hold my silence any longer, I confronted my father in his study. The room smelled of whiskey and old leather, the dim lamp casting long shadows over the shelves lined with books he never read. "What did those men want?" I demanded, my voice sharper than I intended. He looked up, his eyes bloodshot, his expression weary. "You don't understand, Jessica," he said softly. "It's complicated." My fists clenched at my sides. "Then make me understand. Because if I'm going to be dragged into this, I deserve to know." His gaze hardened, a flicker of anger igniting. "The less you know, the safer you are." He turned back to his papers, dismissing me with a wave of his hand. But his words only fueled the fire inside me. I wasn't safe precisely because I didn't know. And if he wouldn't tell me, I would find out on my own. That night, I waited until the house had fallen silent, then crept back into the study. My father's desk was cluttered with documents, contracts, letters written in hurried, almost panicked script. I rifled through them, my breath quickening as I found references to offshore accounts, payments made to unfamiliar names, and most damning of all, letters from my fiancé himself, pleading for more time, promising to secure the deal if only my father kept him protected. My stomach dropped as the truth unfolded. This engagement had never been about love or family honor. It had been a transaction, a shield, a way to merge two corrupt empires under the guise of marriage. And now, with him dead, the shield had shattered. The floor creaked behind me. I froze, my heart leaping into my throat. Slowly, I turned and there stood my mother, her face pale, her eyes glistening not with tears, but with something far more dangerous. "Jessica," she whispered, her voice trembling. "What have you seen?" For a moment, neither of us moved, the weight of our shared silence suffocating the room. Then she stepped closer, her hands twisting nervously in her apron. "You need to stop digging. You don't know who's watching. You don't know what they'll do." Her warning was more plea than command, but I could see the truth in her eyes. She was afraid. Not for me, but for herself. I wanted to ask her 100 questions, to demand the whole truth, but before I could speak, a sharp knock echoed through the house, loud, insistent, like a fist pounding against the very heart of our lives. My mother's face drained of color. She grabbed my arm, her grip surprisingly strong, and whispered urgently, "Don't open it." But the knocking grew louder, more forceful, and the walls seemed to tremble with each blow. Whoever was at the door wasn't here for pleasantries. They were here for answers. And maybe, just maybe, for me. The knocking didn't stop. It grew harder, faster, each thud reverberating through the house like a war drum. My mother's grip tightened on my arm, her nails digging into my skin as though she could hold me back from the danger clawing at our front door. "Stay here," she whispered, her voice trembling but firm. She moved toward the entrance with hesitant steps, each one echoing in the silence like footsteps into a grave. My heart pounded as I crouched in the hallway, straining to see through the thin gap where the study door was ajar. The pounding ceased suddenly, replaced by a chilling stillness that felt even more threatening than the noise had been. Then, a voice, low, steady, male, drifted through the door. "We know what you're hiding. Open the door, or we'll open it for you." The words turned my blood to ice. They weren't here for condolences. They were here to collect. My mother froze, her hand trembling over the doorknob. My father appeared from behind, his face pale, his jaw clenched. "Don't," he hissed, grabbing her wrist. But the warning came too late. A loud crack split the air as the door shuddered beneath a heavy blow. My mother gasped, stumbling back, and my father cursed under his breath. The second blow sent the hinges groaning, wood splintering, dust floating like ash into the air. Fear tightened around my chest, yet adrenaline surged just as powerfully. I knew if they came inside, they would not leave without answers or bodies. My instinct screamed at me to run. But where? Out into the night, into the arms of men who already knew too much. Or deeper into the house, where my family's lies were stacked like tinder waiting for a spark. The third blow sent the door crashing inward, shards of wood scattering across the floor. Two men stepped inside, their silhouettes sharp against the dim light from the street. Both wore dark suits, their faces grim, their movements deliberate. The taller one carried a folder, thick and worn, while the other's hand rested conspicuously near the bulge of a weapon beneath his jacket. "Mr. Harris," the taller one said coolly, addressing my father by name. "We gave you time. Time is up." My father stood rigid, his voice trembling as he replied, "I told you I need more days. I can settle this. I swear," the man sneered, tossing the folder onto the table with a thud. Paper spilled across the polished wood contracts, signatures, photographs. But one photo slid free and landed near my feet. My breath caught when I saw it. It was of me, standing at the library, holding the articles I had printed. Panic seized me. They had been watching, tracking, documenting every step I had taken. My legs threatened to give out, but I forced myself to stay still. Hidden in the shadow of the doorway, the shorter man stepped closer to my father, his voice sharp. "Your daughter's curiosity is becoming problematic. If she keeps digging, we can't guarantee her safety. Or yours." My father's face hardened, but he didn't glance in my direction. Didn't betray that he knew I was only feet away. For a fleeting moment, I hated him not for his silence, but for the way he allowed me to carry danger I had never asked for. My mother sobbed quietly, her hands trembling as she clutched her apron like a shield. The taller man snapped the folder shut. "You have 72 hours. Deliver what you owe or we start collecting in other ways." His eyes flicked toward the shadows where I hid, a faint smile curling at his lips, as if he knew I was there all along. And then, as quickly as they had stormed in, they were gone. The broken door swung uselessly on its hinges. the night wind slithering inside like a warning. For several long moments, no one moved. My father collapsed into a chair, his face buried in his hands. My mother slid to the floor, whispering prayers under her breath, as though words could shield us from the storm now circling closer. I pressed myself against the wall, my entire body trembling. They had given us 72 hours. But I knew deep down this wasn't about debts or business alone. It was about control, about silencing anyone who might expose what they had built in the shadows. And now, I wasn't just a bystander. I was a target. That night, I couldn't close my eyes. I lay awake, listening to every creak of the house, every whisper of wind against the shattered doorway. My father stayed in the study, pacing, muttering to himself, his voice a mixture of anger and desperation. My mother wept silently in her room, her cries muffled against pillows. I sat in darkness, clutching the photograph of myself from the folder, staring at my own blurred figure frozen on glossy paper. They were watching me then. They are watching me now. And the realization burrowed deep into my bones. If I didn't act, if I didn't uncover the truth before their 72 hours expired, it wouldn't just be my fiancé who ended up in the ground. It would be me. The hours crawled like shadows across the walls, each second sharpening my dread into something unyielding. By morning, I felt hollow, like a puppet held together by string and fear. Yet beneath the exhaustion, a strange fire burned, one I hadn't felt in years. For so long, I had allowed my family to script my life, silencing my instincts, ignoring my resistance, pretending I was happy about an engagement I never wanted. But last night had torn the veil from everything. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about survival, about facing the sinister forces circling our lives and refusing to let them consume me. I rose from bed with a trembling resolve and dressed quietly, avoiding the creaks in the floorboards as though the house itself might betray me. When I stepped into the hallway, I found my father still awake, his eyes bloodshot, his suit jacket draped carelessly across a chair. He didn't notice me at first, his attention fixed on papers scattered across his desk, his lips moving silently as he calculated something too dangerous to speak aloud. "Where are you going?" His voice sliced through the air when he finally saw me. It wasn't curious, it was commanding, threaded with suspicion. I froze, then steadied my breath. "To the library," I said softly, forcing calm into every syllable. "I need to understand what we're up against. If those men are watching us, they already know I've been digging." His jaw tightened. For a moment, I thought he might forbid me, might lock me in my room the way he had once done when I was a defiant teenager. But then his shoulders sagged under invisible weight, and he simply muttered, "Be careful." There was no fatherly warmth in his tone, only defeat. The streets outside felt unfamiliar in the pale morning light. Each face I passed suspicious. Every car engine growled too loud. I clutched the photograph I had taken from the folder, sliding it into the pocket of my coat. A constant reminder, they knew me, they had marked me. Yet I pressed on, the image fueling my determination instead of breaking it. At the library, the world seemed deceptively calm. Students hunched over laptops. Elderly men flipped newspapers. The quiet hum of routine wrapping the room like a thin blanket over a chasm. I chose a table near the archives, where the old microfilm machines still whirred like ghosts of forgotten decades. For hours, I scrolled through headlines, cross-referencing names I had overheard, transactions I remembered from whispered conversations my parents thought I hadn't heard. Each connection was a thread, and slowly, a web began to form, a web so vast, so intricate, that I realized my family wasn't merely entangled in corruption. They were a central strand. The Harris name appeared again and again, tied to shell companies, land deals, and donations masked as charity. But what froze me was a small, easily overlooked article buried deep in the archives. Local businessmen cleared of suspicion in fiancé's disappearance. My heart pounded as I scanned the lines. It was from 20 years ago. The name matched my fiancé's father, the woman who had disappeared, a girl my age then, with the same quiet eyes and hesitant smile I had seen reflected in my own mirror. My blood ran cold. This wasn't a coincidence. This engagement, this arrangement, it wasn't about love or unity. It was about continuing a legacy built on silence, fear, and buried secrets. And the one man who might have carried those secrets into the future had been found dead. As I copied the article into my notes, a shadow fell across the page. I looked up sharply to find a man standing there, tall, broad-shouldered, with eyes that seemed to pierce through layers of pretense. He wasn't a librarian, nor was he a casual visitor. His stance was too firm, his attention too focused on me. "You shouldn't be looking at that," he said, his voice low, steady, dangerous. My throat tightened, words failing me. He glanced around casually, as if checking whether anyone else had noticed, then leaned closer. "If you value your life, close that file and go home. Pretend you never saw it. Pretend you don't care." His warning was almost gentle, but beneath it throbbed a lethal promise. He straightened before I could respond and walked away, vanishing into the maze of shelves as though he had never existed at all. My hands shook so violently I could barely gather my papers. The weight of what I had just uncovered pressed down on me, suffocating. But there was no going back now. I couldn't unsee the truth. Couldn't unknow the horror buried in those faded headlines. I left the library, clutching my bag like a lifeline, my eyes scanning every reflection in every shop window for signs of the man following me. By the time I reached home, my pulse hadn't slowed. I locked my door, slid the article beneath my mattress, and whispered to myself a vow that felt both terrifying and liberating. They can watch me. They can threaten me. But I will not stop. Not until every secret they buried is unearthed. The vow I whispered that day became the only thing anchoring me. A fragile rope in a storm that threatened to sweep me into nothingness. But courage, I quickly learned, did not erase fear, it sharpened it. Made it almost unbearable, yet strangely useful. Every sound became an alarm, every silence a trap. That evening, while my parents argued behind closed doors, my mother's voice brittle with panic, my father's gruff with calculation, I spread my notes across the floor of my bedroom, piecing together the fragments of a puzzle I hadn't asked for but could no longer ignore. Threads connected names, dates, disappearances, debts, and violence. At the center of it all was a pattern too deliberate to dismiss. My fiancé hadn't simply been a victim of chance. His death was the splintering of a carefully arranged mirror, a reflection they couldn't allow to crack. And now, I was staring at the shards. The weight of realization crushed me. I understood then that my family wasn't merely passive, innocent bystanders caught in the crossfire of powerful men. They were participants, maybe not killers with their own hands, but enablers, protectors of a rotten empire stitched together through silence and obedience. My engagement had been a transaction, a reinforcement of alliances built on fear. The boy's smile, his cold grip, the suffocating expectation, they were never about companionship or love. They were about continuation. And when his body surfaced, the mask slipped, leaving the truth raw and bleeding. If I exposed them, I would tear apart not just my family, but the entire foundation on which we had lived. Yet if I stayed silent, I would become their next sacrifice, as invisible as the girl who had disappeared 20 years ago, erased and forgotten while their empire endured. A sudden creak jolted me from my thoughts. I glanced toward the door locked, but the shadows beneath it seemed darker than before. I hurried to stuff the papers beneath the loose floorboard near my bed, the one hiding spot my father never discovered during his many intrusions into my privacy. Just as I pressed the wood back into place, a soft knock tapped against the door. "Jessica?" My mother's voice floated through, fragile and pleading. "We need to talk." I hesitated, my pulse quickening. Her tone wasn't commanding. It wasn't the voice she used when reminding me of my duties as a daughter or bride-to-be. It was broken, almost childlike. I unlocked the door slowly, keeping my body poised to slam it shut again if needed. She stepped inside, her eyes red and swollen, her hands trembling as though holding onto something invisible that threatened to slip away. "They'll kill us all," she whispered, collapsing onto the edge of my bed. "Your father thinks he can bargain, but he doesn't understand. Once they know you've seen too much, once they realize you're not like me, obedient, silent, they won't stop until you're gone. Jessica, please, just stop digging. Let it go." Tears streamed down her face. But beneath her fear was something else, a confession of her own complicity. I knelt before her, my voice shaking but resolute. "Mom, I can't. If I let it go, if I pretend like you did, I'll be destroyed from the inside out. Don't you see? They already took my future. I won't let them take me too." Her shoulders trembled, and for a moment, I thought she might scream, call for my father, beg me to obey. But instead, she reached into the pocket of her dress and pulled out a small, crumpled envelope. She placed it in my hand, her eyes darting toward the door, as though the walls themselves had ears. "I shouldn't have kept this," she whispered, "but maybe you'll use it better than I ever could." Inside the envelope was a faded photograph of a young woman, my fiancé, the one who had vanished 2 decades ago. On the back, written in hurried scrawl, were the words, "She knew too much. Don't make the same mistake." My chest tightened, the message both a warning and a dare. My mother's hand closed over mine, her voice breaking. "Promise me you'll be careful." I studied her. This woman, who had spent her life bowing under the weight of secrets, For the first time, I saw not weakness, but survival in her silence. Yet survival wasn't enough for me anymore. I nodded slowly, slipping the photograph into the same pocket where I kept the image the men had dropped of me. Two women, decades apart, trapped by the same web. But I was determined that one of us, at least one, would break free. My mother kissed my forehead, her tears wet against my skin. Before slipping back into the hallway like a ghost fading into its grave. Alone again, I sat on the edge of the bed, clutching the photograph, feeling the noose of 72 hours tighten around my neck. Tomorrow, I promised myself, I would stop hiding in shadows. Tomorrow, I would step into the light, even if it burned. Morning came heavy, the kind of light that doesn't cleanse but exposes. Dust motes floated in the beams cutting through my window, dancing like tiny witnesses to the storm unraveling around me. My body ached from sleeplessness. My mind from the weight of choices pressing like stones on my chest. The photograph from the envelope lay on the nightstand beside me, her young face staring into mine across decades. A silent plea that screamed louder than any words. I slipped it into my bag alongside my notes and the article I had hidden away, then wrapped a scarf around my head, disguising myself just enough to slip into the world unnoticed. If they were watching and I knew they were, I needed to move like smoke. Visible for an instant, then gone. The streets pulsed with ordinary life, vendors shouting prices of fruit, children dragging their heavy school bags, buses belching exhaust into the morning air. And yet, to me, every glance lingered too long. Every stranger's step behind me felt calculated. I kept my reflection in shop windows within sight, using them like mirrors to catch the ghost that followed. Twice I caught the same man, a lean figure in a gray coat, pretending to read a newspaper one moment, tying his shoelace the next. He thought he was clever. He wasn't clever enough. I ducked into a narrow alley near the post office, heart racing, and waited in the shadow of a rusted fire escape. Sure enough, his footsteps echoed in too quick, too sure. When he turned the corner, his eyes widened empty air. I had scaled halfway up the escape ladder, crouched against the metal, watching him skin the alley like a predator denied its prey. His jaw clenched, his fist tightened, and then he vanished back into the crowd. My pulse thundered in my ears. But triumph flared. I could outmaneuver them, at least for now. By noon, I reached the edge of town, where the newspaper office had long ago relocated its archives to a damp, crumbling basement. The clerk behind the desk barely looked at me as I requested boxes from the late 90s. Hours slipped by in the gloom as I sifted through brittle pages. Headlines screaming long-forgotten tragedies. Corruption probes closed with no convictions. Missing women whose names faded before they became headlines. Deals settled out of court. Each piece was a bone, and slowly, a skeleton took shape. The Harris family, my fiancé family, all inextricably linked by blood, marriage, and money. My chest tightened with nausea. This wasn't just my father's death or my fiancé's suspicious death. It was generations of rot, spreading roots, so deep that ripping them out might collapse the ground beneath us all. And then I found it. An article yellowed with time, buried in the local section. Witness in land fraud case dies in car. accident. The name jolted me, my father's former business partner, the one who had vanished when I was a child. I remembered his laughter echoing through our house, the way he'd gifted me a small silver locket before one day never returning. I dug deeper into the stack, my hands trembling until I uncovered another clipping. Fiancé, a prominent heir missing, last seen near riverbank, same year. Same network of names. Same silence swallowing truth whole. I sat frozen, my breath shallow, realization wrapping around me like iron chains. This wasn't coincidence. This was design. Every disappearance, every accident, every death was a stitch in a tapestry woven to protect the powerful. And now, somehow, I had been chosen as another thread to secure the pattern. As I copied the articles into my notebook, a cold draft slid across my neck. I turned. The man in the gray coat stood at the bottom of the basement stairs, no longer pretending, no longer smiling. His eyes locked on mine, and in them, I saw no hesitation. Slowly, deliberately, he pulled a hand from his pocket and pressed a finger to his lips, a silent command. The clerk upstairs shuffled papers, oblivious, while my world shrank to the space between predator and prey. My body screamed to run, but my mind sharpened instead. If I fled now, I'd only confirm their suspicion, sign my own death warrant. So I forced my breath to steady, gathered my notes with trembling hands, and slid them back into the box as though nothing were amiss. When I finally rose, my knees weak, I gave him a small nod as if acknowledging a game one hadn't meant to play. He stepped aside, letting me pass, but his shadow clung to mine up the stairs and out into the brittle daylight. The city had never felt so vast, nor so suffocating. I walked quickly, but without panic, each step rehearsed, controlled. Inside, terror roared, but I held it down with iron fists, because now I knew for certain they weren't simply watching. They were shepherding me, guiding me toward a fate already written. But they underestimated one thing. I wasn't the girl they thought they had trapped. I was becoming something else, something sharper. And before their 72 hours ran out, they would learn just how dangerous the girl they dismissed had become. That night, the house felt like a coffin with walls. The broken front door had been hastily boarded with plywood, but it did nothing to keep the cold or the dread outside. My father sat in the study with a half-empty glass of whiskey, the amber liquid trembling in his hand each time he lifted it. My mother busied herself in the kitchen long after dinner was over, her movements frantic, mechanical, as though if she kept chopping vegetables and scrubbing pans, she could drown out the truth threatening to drown her. I stayed in my room. The notes spread again across the floor like pieces of a shattered mirror. But this time, I wasn't just staring at them in despair. I was planning. The articles I had gathered formed a timeline of corruption spanning decades, a roadmap of deceit. If exposed carefully, it could unravel everything. But to release them recklessly would be suicide. The men in suits weren't just enforcers, they were executioners. If I wanted to survive, I needed allies. At midnight, I turned on my old laptop, the screen flickering to life like a reluctant witness. I began typing furiously, creating a digital archive of every piece of evidence, every name, every date. The clatter of the keys felt dangerous in the silence, as if each letter might summon the men in suits through the boarded door. Still, I pressed on, my fingers aching as I built a file large enough to bury my family's empire. When I finished, I encrypted it and sent it to an anonymous storage account, one linked to a dead email I had created years ago in a rebellious phase. Insurance. If anything happened to me, if I disappeared like the women before me, the truth would not die with me. The thought gave me both comfort and terror. Comfort that I had a weapon. Terror that it might not be enough. Exhaustion tugged at me, but adrenaline refused to release its grip. Around 2 in the morning, I heard the soft creak of the back door. My body stiffened, breath held, as I crept toward the sound. Through the crack of my bedroom door, I saw a shadow glide through the kitchen, tall and deliberate. For a heartbeat, I thought it was one of the men come early, here to silence me before my 72 hours expired. But then the figure stepped into a shaft of moonlight, and I saw his face. My cousin Daniel. His eyes darted nervously, his hands clutching a folder nearly identical to the one the men in suits had slammed onto our table days earlier. He moved quickly, avoiding the rooms where my parents might wake, heading straight toward the study. Curiosity overpowered fear. I followed on silent feet, crouching behind the hallway arch as Daniel slipped inside. My father looked up, startled, but instead of anger, relief flooded his face. "Did you get it?" he whispered. Daniel nodded, setting the folder down with shaking hands. "But this is the last time. If they find out I've been helping you." My father cut him off sharply. "They won't. You're too valuable. They wouldn't dare." Their voices were low, but I caught every word, each syllable slicing through me like glass. Daniel wasn't just family, he was a courier, a bridge between my father and the monsters circling us. My father had dragged him into the pit as well, chaining him with secrets too heavy for anyone to carry. Then Daniel said something that made my blood run cold. "She knows." His eyes flicked toward the hallway, toward me, though I was sure he couldn't see me in the dark. My father's face hardened instantly, his knuckles whitening around the whiskey glass. "Jessica." Daniel nodded once, grim. "I saw her at the archives today. She's digging too deep. If you don't stop her, they will." My pulse hammered in my ears. Every instinct screamed to run, to burst out the door and flee into the night. But my feet remained rooted, my body frozen by the betrayal seeping through me. Family wasn't protection. Family was surveillance. My father exhaled slowly, setting the glass down. "Leave it to me," he said. "She won't be a problem." The room tilted around me, the walls closing in. My father's words weren't a promise of protection, they were a sentence. If I stayed, if I trusted him, if I gave him one more ounce of obedience, I would vanish just like the girl in the photograph, just like the witness in the article, just like all the others swallowed by their silence. Quietly, I backed away from the hallway, each step deliberate, praying the creak of the floor wouldn't betray me. When I reached my room, I locked the door, shoved the desk against it, and collapsed onto the floor, my chest heaving. My own father was willing to sacrifice me to preserve his empire of lies. The blood in my veins felt foreign, poisoned, as if it no longer belonged to me. But even in the crushing weight of betrayal, a spark ignited inside me. If he had declared me a problem, then I would become a problem too big for him or them to contain. I wasn't going to disappear quietly. I was going to fight. And if that meant tearing my family's legacy apart piece by piece, I would. Because survival was no longer enough. Justice was the only thing that could keep me alive. The decision to fight crystallized overnight, not in one dramatic moment, but in 1,000 tiny fractures. The bruise still faint on my wrist from my fiancé's grip. The way my mother's eyes begged me to accept chains. The sound of Daniel's voice betraying me to my father. The photograph of the vanished woman pressed between my notes. By dawn, I no longer felt like the same Jessica who had sat at the dinner table days ago, quietly enduring everyone's claps and cheers. That Jessica had been a ghost, drifting through a script written by others. This Jessica was awake, alive, sharpened into something dangerous by the betrayal of those she loved. I dressed quickly, sliding the evidence into my bag, and left through the back door before the house fully stirred. The air outside was cold, biting, but it carried a clarity that filled my lungs with resolve. I went first to the only person I thought might help, Detective Cole, the officer who had questioned me so intently the night my fiancé's body was discovered. He had lingered on my silence, on the answers I didn't give, and I had seen suspicion flicker in his eyes. If anyone could read between the lines of this nightmare, it was him. His office was tucked inside a squat brick building on the edge of town. When I entered, he looked up from his desk, his expression wary but alert. "Jessica Harris," he said slowly, leaning back in his chair. "Something tells me you didn't come here for casual conversation." My throat tightened, but I forced myself to speak. "You asked me if I had reservations about the engagement." I lied. "And I have proof that everything about this arrangement, about his death, about my family was rotten." I unloaded the folder onto his desk, my fingers trembling as I spread the photographs, clippings, and notes. For a long moment, he said nothing, just sifted through the evidence with methodical precision. Then he looked up, his gaze sharp. "Do you realize what you've just placed in my hands? This isn't gossip. This is enough to light a fire that will burn half this town to the ground." His words should have frightened me, but instead they steadied me. "Good," I said softly. "Then burn it." He studied me, the silence stretching, before he leaned closer. "You need to understand something. Once this starts, there's no turning back. They'll come after you harder than ever. They'll come after me too. Are you ready for that?" The truth was, I wasn't. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to hide, to choose survival over justice. But I thought of the vanished women, of my fiancé's body in the dirt, of my father whispering that I wouldn't be a problem. And suddenly, fear felt smaller than rage. "Yes," I said firmly. "I'm ready." He nodded once, slow and deliberate, then reached for his phone. "Then let's start by making sure you live long enough to see this through." His tone was calm, but in his eyes burned the same recognition that had begun to shape me. The knowledge that sometimes survival and justice were the same fight. We spent the next hours building a strategy. He showed me how to duplicate the files, how to create multiple caches hidden across the city, how to send pieces anonymously to journalists who couldn't be bought. Each move was a stitch in a shield, fragile but growing stronger. Still, with every plan, I felt the weight of time pressing closer. The 72 hours were nearly gone, and I knew my father wouldn't wait until the end. Already, he would be plotting, deciding whether to silence me with words, confinement, or something far worse. The knowledge sat in my chest like a ticking bomb, one I had to defuse before it consumed me. By dusk, Detective Cole insisted on walking me back to the edge of my neighborhood, his presence a silent deterrent to the eyes that always seemed to follow. We parted at the corner, his warning sharp in my ears, "They'll come tonight. Be ready." The words echoed as I slipped back into the house, the smell of dinner heavy in the air. My parents seated at the table as though nothing had fractured between us. My father looked up, his eyes cold, assessing. "Where were you?" The lie came easily now, smoother than truth. "Library." He studied me for a moment longer, then returned to his plate. My mother didn't look at me at all. Daniel was absent. I ate nothing, though I forced the motions of chewing, of sipping water, of pretending I was still part of this family. But inside, my heart was steel. They thought I was a pawn to be moved, silenced, erased. Tonight, I would show them I wasn't a pawn at all. Tonight, I would step into the storm not as their obedient daughter, but as the storm itself. That night, the air inside the house felt heavier than ever, thick with the unspoken certainty that the storm had finally arrived. My bedroom window rattled against the wind, though I knew it wasn't the weather but the pulse of my own anticipation that made the glass tremble. I didn't sleep, not even for a second. I sat at my desk with the lamp dimmed low, the duplicate evidence stacked neatly in envelopes, my phone charged and waiting for Cole's signal. Midnight crept past, and then 1 o'clock, and then, at last, I heard it, the unmistakable creak of the back door, a sound I had known since childhood, now warped into something predatory. My breath slowed, controlled. I didn't move. I waited. Footsteps climbed the stairs, steady, deliberate, as if whoever it was knew exactly where to find me. The door handle turned, and my father's silhouette filled the frame. He stepped inside without hesitation, closing the door softly behind him. The dim light caught his face, calm, unflinching, resolved. In his hand, glinting faintly, was a length of cord. My stomach tightened, but I refused to flinch. "Jessica," he said evenly, almost tenderly, "it's time to stop pretending. You've become a danger to all of us. This will be quick." His words might have shattered me once, but not tonight. Tonight, I remembered every woman's name in those clippings, every echo of their silenced voices, every bruise and every whispered threat. Tonight, I remembered who I had become. I rose slowly, my eyes locked on his, my voice steady. "No, Father. Tonight, it's your time to stop pretending." Before he could react, the window behind me burst open. Cole and 2 officers swarmed in, guns drawn, their shouts slicing through the stillness. My father froze, his mask cracking, his hand tightening on the cord, but his power draining with every second. Cole's voice was sharp, commanding, Drop it, Harris. It's over. And in that moment, for the first time in my life, I saw my father's fear. Not of the law, not of exposure, but of me, of the daughter who had slipped beyond his control. The rest unfolded in fragments. My father dragged from the room. My mother's distant wail. Daniel's footsteps thundering down the hall before being seized as well. The house that had always been a fortress of silence became a stage for truth. I stood in the middle of it, trembling but unbroken. My chest rising with breaths that felt like freedom. Cole placed a hand on my shoulder, steady, grounding. "It's done," he said quietly, but I knew it wasn't truly done. The trials, the headlines, the endless retelling of this family's secrets, those battles lay ahead. Yet for the first time, I welcomed them, because survival wasn't enough anymore. Justice was the only ending I would accept. In the days that followed, the weight I had carried for so long began to lift. The evidence spread like wildfire. Journalists digging deeper than I ever imagined, uncovering layers of corruption and violence that reached far beyond my family. Strangers called me brave. Though I didn't feel brave, I felt scarred, hollow, but unyielding. Each headline that exposed another truth was a piece of me stitching itself back together. The town no longer looked at me as the quiet daughter at the dinner table. They looked at me as the woman who refused to disappear. And somewhere in that transformation, I began to see the path forward, not just to survive, but to use my voice for the silenced. I spoke of resilience, of justice, of the strength it takes to rise from betrayal. I spoke of survival not as a burden, but as a weapon. My father and Daniel awaited trial. My mother lived in self-imposed exile, and I walked free, carrying their shadows, but no longer defined by them. I was no longer the girl who stayed quiet while everyone clapped. I was the woman who chose to speak when silence was meant to destroy me. So if you're hearing my story now, let it remind you, betrayal may break you, but it can also rebuild you into something unrecognizable, something unstoppable. I am Jessica, 35 years old, and I chose not to vanish. I chose to fight. I chose to live. And if you've ever felt silenced, trapped, or betrayed, know this: your story isn't over until you decide it is. My story is only beginning. And if you want to witness how far I will take this fight, how survival becomes strength, and strength becomes justice, then stay with me. Because the darkness I escaped is not mine alone. It belongs to anyone who has ever been broken. And together, we will turn it into fire. Like this story if it shook you. Subscribe, because the battles ahead are darker, deeper, and more dangerous, and you won't want to miss what comes next.